Hi, I'm Lee Lefevre, host of Build Livable. We're homeowners helping homeowners navigate custom home construction projects. And today, our focus is cost per square foot. Now, if you've ever looked at building a home, the concept of cost per square foot has surely come up. It's a general estimate of the current home construction costs in a specific area. And we'll talk about that, the why area matters in a little bit. It's really one of the only ways a homeowner has of estimating what's possible with a specific budget. Now, in terms of how it's calculated and how it's discussed, you'll usually hear it in hundreds of dollars, like, oh, the current cost per square foot in this area is about $500 per square foot. And the people who are more likely to know that number are builders and architects, banks, and real estate agents. It's really anyone involved in construction will have a number on hand, and it's always changing. It's not something that's very consistent. The number comes from when a house is complete, looking back and saying, okay, how many square feet was it and what did it cost? And that gives you the current cost per square foot. So if a builder says to you that the current cost is $500 per square foot, and you're planning to build a house that's about 2,000 square feet, the calculation is really simple. You multiply those numbers and find that your house would be about $1 million. Now, that number is an estimate. It's not something you can plan on. It's really just a guide for understanding what is possible. There's a lot that goes into that number and a lot of ways that you can alter it for what you need. And one way to think about it is the number kind of being on a spectrum. So if you hear $500 per square foot, you might hear of a neighbor that built a house for $150 per square foot. Or you may hear of somebody else in the area who built a house for $2,000 per square foot. So the question becomes, how does that happen? Why is there these variations, and what goes into them? So there's three factors that I think are important to consider. The first is the type of home that you'd like to build. So if you want to do a fully custom home, which means that you are using an original set of plans that was designed just for you and a house that's built from scratch, that's probably on the higher end of the cost per square foot. If you have a semi-custom home, which means maybe you bought plans online, or maybe you're building only part of the structure or finishing the structure, that's another factor to consider. And then we have things like investment homes that are meant for resale, or modular homes or kit homes that can have a very different cost per square foot. So the type of home matters, and so does the location. Construction is all generally local, and that comes down to the local labor market and how much labor costs at the time. Also transport. If you live in a remote location that's difficult to access, if your building site is complex and difficult, maybe it's on a hillside or involves a lot of site work, and also general market competition. If there are not enough general contractors to go around, that cost per square foot can go up. The last thing to consider is really the quality or finish of the home that you want to build. And this has a lot to do with your budget. So if you want a home that's the high-end type of home that has really fine finishes, that requires a lot of time and craftsmanship, that uses rare, hard-to-find materials that are difficult to work with, or just a really complex design, then those things can all increase your cost per square foot. So you can use these variables to think where you land in this situation. So then the question really becomes, what can you as a homeowner do to help bring down some of these costs if that's a concern for you? So let's look at some things that you can do. The first thing is a really big picture question about scope and complexity. So scope is really the parameters of your project. How big of a house? What is involved in it? And I think this often comes down to a discussion of needs versus wants. Right? When we're planning our dream home, it's easy to think about all the wants, right? I want it to be this, I want to do this many bedrooms, this many baths, all kinds of things. But when budget comes up, You sometimes have to revert back to needs. What do I really need this house to be? And I think that currently a lot of people designing houses are finding opportunities to be really happy with a house that fits their lifestyle and is not some big house that requires a lot more to build. The second factor is complexity. It's really hard for a homeowner to understand what something on paper actually costs to implement. In fact, it's even hard to estimate it. But every time there's something complex that's in the plans that needs to be built, that complexity comes with money, and it often creates a ripple effect that's really hard to understand ahead of time. So complexity is a big thing. In reading books about home design, a rule of thumb among designers is that if you're really focused on cost, then be square. And so what do I mean by that? Well, if you look at the footprint of your home, or if you look at the roof lines and things are irregular, there's a lot of curves and round things and the decks that have all kinds of crazy shapes, that is complexity. And it takes time to implement those types of designs. And again, it's hard to estimate. And if you really want to make that easy, think about your house being more square. I mean, if you think about lumber, building materials, it's all right angles. And so the more right angles there are, the less cutting that has to happen. And that's a small thing that gets multiplied over and over in a building project and can really make a difference. Talk with an architect. Talk with your architect about how the design you're working on relates to cost and how to simplify that design to account for costs. Another thing you can do is to understand the major materials costs. Like the substance of your house is things like concrete, lumber, drywall, steel, things like that. And those are like huge buckets of costs. And if you understand what the going rate is for those materials, you can adjust your design to say, hey, concrete is really expensive right now. Let's change the plan on paper to use less concrete, and maybe we'll replace it with steel or lumber or whatever is more affordable. You as a homeowner have an opportunity to work with the architect on those decisions and talk to the general contractor about what those going rates are and what he or she might recommend. So finally, we'll talk about value engineering. So in building a custom home, your plans will be reviewed by a structural engineer, and their main focus is safety and making sure the home and the structure can survive the elements and be a safe home for you. That doesn't always include an element of the budget or cost that's required to do that. But there is something called value engineering, and if you bring that up, or if you work with your architect and structural engineer to say, I want value engineering, the engineer can use that perspective to develop the specifications with that in mind. So that's something to think about bringing up in your project. So just to summarize these points and some bigger points, money is a common source of stress. And I don't think that it has to be for everyone. If you feel like that you're in control, it's the inevitable uncertainties that come up out of nowhere that you have to react to that really compounds that stress. And I think that there is relief to be found in having realistic expectations and a clear understanding of the process and how it all fits together. And so that's really what we are doing at Build Livable. We have a free course called Start Your Project on the Right Foot. It's got downloadable documents with over 100 questions to ask builders and architects when hiring. Again, totally free. I hope you'll check it out. It's at buildlivable.com.